So saying good evening to everyone who is joining me from Kenya and East Africa, where we are sending this Zoom session from. I know there are a few who may be joining from outside that region. And thank you for this opportunity to just speak on this very relevant and very current issue that is facing us as a people. Faith has done a good introduction of myself. And has indicated that I have spent a bit of time in financial services. I have been involved largely in microfinance, in product research and development, and spent about 10 years of my working life there, and a bit of consulting work in that area. I've also spent about 8 years in personal financial literacy training work, both in East Africa and beyond. And the learnings that I have picked up in the course of this experience is part of what I bring to bear during this interaction. As indicated at the beginning of the session, it would be good if you would just mute your mic. It would help block off the background noise. I'm also a counselor, and Faith has also mentioned that. And I'm also involved in training at an organization called CMS Africa. I've put up our website in case you're interested in following our work. The financial literacy content I'm going to be speaking from is part of a course that we offer at CMS Africa called Financial Freedom for Families. And so I'll be borrowing heavily from that. And if my comments and the interactions that follow cause you to pick an interest in this course, we'll also be glad to assist with that. Let me start with the context that we are going to cover today. I'll just spend a few minutes reflecting on the reality that we are in, which is the COVID-19 context. I'll also delve into financial anxiety and just help us understand what that is and what that looks like. And then we look at practical tips that you could use in this context of crisis and possibly beyond this context of crisis. And then I'll finish with a recap and we'll do a bit of a Q&A. The session will be fairly fast because of the content I have to cover. If I'm too fast, please note that on the chat, and my co-host Faith will assist me either recap an aspect that I might have moved over too fast, or if you need me to respond to something, she'll be able to assist. So I invite you to please use the chat function for any concerns that you may have as we go along. So I'll have my focus on two pillars. One will be the anxiety aspect of our topic today, and the second will be the financial tips aspect of our conversation. So let me start with the context that we find ourselves in. We are right now in the thick of COVID-19. There's some encouraging news coming from some of the Western countries. Italy is one of the ones that was hardest hit, and reports as at today is that they are slowly opening up their economies and starting to allow a measure of activity in those economies. Now that's promising to see, because then it means at least there is some hope at the end of the tunnel. But in Kenya, we are still in the thick of it. We are still reporting higher numbers. We are still dealing with the implications of this situation. And so the topic remains relevant, and as we'll be discussing, even more so going into the coming days. The economic impact of COVID-19 is also very real. Businesses are shutting down, jobs are being lost, pay cuts are a serious maneuver that many organizations are considering. And so this is a reality we are contending with. Social unrest, the likelihood of the situation that we are faced with precipitating social unrest is very high. Crime may be part of how this may manifest. So this is a reality we need to be awake to and be very concerned about. Mental health concerns are also on the rise, and hence even just these presentations and others similar to it are aimed at helping us as a people respond and address some of these issues. But what you're observing, apart from the financial anxiety that we are going to be discussing today, are issues of domestic violence that are well documented in our various media outlets, increased substance abuse, uh, not as much talked about is process addictions that are really on the rise in this context. Also being observed at this time are increased cases of depression that are being reported to us who are in the counseling sphere. So these are concerns that we have, and many more that I may not have touched on. Now, the situation as it is and the impact of it, the conservative estimates are that this may last anywhere between 6 to 18 months. This scenario may play out for another 6 to 18 months. We may step back, we may open our economies, but the impact, especially the financial impact, the economic ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic will be felt for a significant chunk of time to come. In Kenya, and a number of East African countries who are also in an electoral cycle, this period ushers us well into the beginnings or mid of next year, which unfortunately for us is a pre-election year. So 2022 is our current intended election year in Kenya. The pattern has shown that the year before an election in Kenya and the year after an election in Kenya, we have a dip in the economy. So it's very likely that the hardship we're experiencing will be compounded by the political noise that will most likely arise come next year and the year after into the year 2023. And so if you're looking at your personal financial outlook, you want to have a long-term view. You want to dig in for the long haul. And that's a reality that we have to contend with. Other countries and other contexts may have a different reality to contend with, but that's one that here in this part of the world is very real and we are awake to. So if that is the context, if that's the situation that we are in, then how do we then respond to this question of financial anxiety? Let me start by first explaining what anxiety is. Anxiety is persistent or excessive or chronic worry. Persistent, excessive, chronic worry. You're not able to shake it off as easily. It stays with you. What you need to understand is that anxiety is actually a normal human response to potential change. It's a normal human response to potential change. However, it becomes of psychological concern if it meets a certain criteria. Number one, if it interferes with normal life function, and I'll be unpackaging this as we go along. Number two, if it causes suffering. This suffering could be physical, this suffering could be mental, it could be emotional. But if the anxiety levels are such that they are causing some form of suffering in these spheres, then from a psychological perspective, this is of concern and needs to be addressed. If there is evidence of unhealthy coping in response to their anxiety, especially where this is marked by harm to self or harm to others, then it is of interest and of concern to a counselor. If the coping methodologies that a person employs when they're dealing with their anxiety are such that they result in wasteful habits that would cause concern to significant others in your life, then possibly you're dealing with a question of anxiety. if your normal coping ability is overwhelmed. Human beings have a lot of resilience. However, if that resilience is overcome by the anxiety they're experiencing, then it becomes a space for a counselor or somebody in the psychological space to come and be of assistance to that individual. So if that is anxiety, what then is financial anxiety? Financial anxiety is a deep and persistent sense of worry and fear about one's financial situation and their ability to fulfill current and anticipated obligations. A deep and persistent sense of worry and fear about one's financial situation and the ability to fulfill current and anticipated obligations. It can also be described as an uneasy or unhealthy attitude toward engaging with and administering personal finances in an effective way. What this plays out like is whenever you think about your personal financial situation, then that thought is accompanied by a sense of worry and concern. And often this is because you feel inadequate, you feel unable to respond to immediate financial needs or needs that you anticipate will be coming at you in the foreseeable future. If this characterizes how you relate with your financial reflections, then you're possibly looking at a situation of financial anxiety. Now, I'm going to describe some markers of anxiety and how they manifest. And I want to ask two things of you as I do this in this page. Number one, I want you to tick and track what I'll be mentioning. So if it applies to you, maybe on the side or with a pen and paper, you can just tick or just mark that, yeah, I think that relates to me. So just do that as we go along. And then number two, I'm going to also adjust that I'm also going to request that you do not adjust your screen. What you are seeing is going to be presented as intended. So with that said, let me proceed. Number one, anxiety manifests itself through our emotional aspect. What you'll observe here is an overwhelmed sense or a sense of not being in control. You feel an increasing sense of being overwhelmed when you look at especially your financial circumstances, or not being in control. You feel like you're not in control of your financial circumstances. Number two, you feel helpless. There's a sense of feeling trapped. You can see all these obligations that are coming at you in multiple avenues, and you feel unable to respond to them. I can see somebody's already ticking. Please tick on a paper, don't tick on the screen. Then number three is restlessness. You are unable to sit still. You move about, you are restless. You can't sit still, you can't stand, you can't stay in one place. You're fidgety, you're uncomfortable. Restlessness is a marker that you're experiencing. The underlying root issue you're dealing with is fear. There's fear of a certain outcome. And later we'll be looking at just how do you start addressing that fear. Number two, in your thought sphere, what will be going on? Struggle focusing. Are you able to start and complete your thoughts? Or do you find that your thoughts are disjoint and broken and all mixed up? Or are you able to focus on a task and complete it? Or do you struggle to focus? Is there an increased occurrence of forgetfulness? You left the room to go do something in the kitchen, but when you get there, you can't remember why you went there, or why you went to the room, or why you stood, or why you walked over to the wardrobe, or why you are in this vehicle going wherever it is that you are going. Increased occurrence of forgetfulness. Loss of meaning and purpose. Have you found yourself wondering, what is the use of this? What is the point of it? Why should I even bother anymore? It's just a sense of just losing purpose and energy and meaning. Whatever would enthuse you and excite you no longer does. It's losing whatever appeal that it had. Does that apply to you? In terms of behavior, some of the things you may see is disturbed sleep patterns. Now, this comes in 3 ways. Number one, you are not able to sleep. You get to bed and all you do is toss and turn, toss and turn. Or finally, when you do get to sleep, your sleep is interrupted and you keep waking up. Your sleep is interrupted, you keep waking up, and you can't sleep a full night's sleep. Instead, you get disrupted sleep. Or you sleep, but when you do wake up, it's in an anxious state. You are sweating, your heart is beating, you are scared. And this is something that you've observed variously and severally. If this applies to you, just tick that. Another aspect is avoidance, or the other extreme is obsession. So avoidance is you don't want to talk about money. You don't want to have conversations about money. You push your children away if they want to raise those conversations. You push your spouse away if they want to discuss things about money. You don't pick calls if you know it's people who want to talk to you about money. You avoid people and places, and maybe some of you are grateful for COVID-19 and containment because it's given you an official record, an official reason not to engage with people, but you just avoid. Or you are obsessed with the money situation and you can't stop talking about it, and your inability to respond to the obligations and the situations that you're having, and every conversation that you go to somehow ends up being about money, and it's so emotionally charged as far as you're concerned. Or do you see that you are withdrawn and increasingly irritable, and you respond irrationally and irritably to people who try to engage you, and your fuse blows very easily, and you respond angrily to people around you? Is this happening to you? Or is there a loss of appetite? You can't enjoy food anymore. You don't enjoy sexual intimacy anymore. You just don't have an appetite for these things and many other things. But things that you ordinarily appreciate and enjoy doing, you've lost appetite for. Physically, there's what you call psychosomatic pain. Pain that you experience, it is real to you, but medically there is no traceable explanation or reason for it. But you know it's real. You know it's your back that's aching. You know it's you have irritable bowel syndrome or movements. You know you have headaches that are persisting. You have all these issues going on with you. But medically, when they investigate or they try to figure out what's going on, they can't find the root cause for that or a medical explanation for it. Do you have fatigue and lethargy? You're just tired and just your energy levels are totally low, and you're not able to ramp them up and respond and be excited and engage with situations and work and things and situations that are going on around you. Is that a reality with you? In some cases, there are people who experience struggle or trouble breathing. Is that something that you have contended with? That your breathing is erratic or you're struggling? Is that a concern that you have had? Shakiness. You may have noticed that there's a slight tremor with your hand. There's some, you can't explain it, but you're seeing like there's twitching of muscles and it's just a shaking. And maybe it's very mild, but you can see it. You try to hold your finger in place and you can see there's a shaking there. These are some of the ways that anxiety may manifest. Others may include palpitations, where you can hear your heart beating, or erratic heart rate. You know, like you have a fast heart rate, or you're just feeling that my heart is not operating at the normal function that it does. Are these some things that you're experiencing? So I've mentioned a number of things. I don't know how many you've ticked. Maybe you can go to the chat and just post a number there and see how many of these did you actually get to tick. This is not an exhaustive test for anxiety, but it's just a fairly indicative one. And if you're experiencing a number of these, and the underlying issue when you experience them is financial, like when you can't sleep because you're thinking about money, or you wake up because your nightmare was about money and you're worried about money, or your avoidance is because you don't want to interact with people in money related issues. If the root issue of these signs of anxiety, and let me put a disclaimer and say these signs of anxiety are cross-cutting. If you are wrestling with anxiety, these are signs and many others that I haven't mentioned here that will be manifest. Now, if the underlying issue is finances, then you probably are looking at a situation of financial anxiety. So I don't know whether, Faith, there are any comments so far that have come up and that people are already noting. Maybe I can pause and just hear a few.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Henry, very much for the presentation so far. This particular slide that you're taking us through is very insightful and eye-opening. As I wait to see the numbers that people are going to post, let me share my own personal, what has come out. I remember at the beginning of this COVID time, struggling to focus, and I experienced increased forgetfulness. So for a long time, I didn't even realize that that was anxiety until, much later. So sometimes we just think it's the emotional part, but this brings out the whole array of how this anxiety can manifest. So it's very interesting to see this slide. Okay, so on our chat, there's a question someone is asking, what about oversleeping? Is oversleeping a sign of anxiety? So maybe you can tackle that as we wait for more people to say something in the group.
Okay, so normally there's you look at what you're calling a cocktail of symptoms. So you cannot pick one in isolation. You need to look at a combination. So sometimes it could be a sense of avoidance. You don't want to wake up and face reality. So instead you choose to avoid by this manifestation. However, you may also find that there are other complications that individual is dealing with. Remember, anxiety is the beginning of a continuum, and we'll be addressing that as we go along. And if you don't deal with anxiety in its early stage, then it compounds and becomes a more complex psychological issue that needs to be resolved. So part of what we'll be dealing with as we go along is the need to respond with speed when you start picking these aspects. So allow me to go on, and then we'll come back to the questions and comments later and say there's some good news. And the good news is financial anxiety can be managed. Financial anxiety can be managed and it can be treated. It is a condition that is manageable and that is treatable. There are two aspects to it. There's a psychological aspect and there is a skill and competence or literacy aspect to it. So in the next few slides, I'll be speaking to both. There's a psychological aspect, how can you bring down anxiety levels, but there's also a competence aspect and there's a skill aspect, a literacy aspect that you need to address. So I'll be speaking to these two, but this session will not be able to delve into so much detail. So let me start with the psychological aspect and remind you again that anxiety is a normal reaction. It's a normal human reaction. We need it to survive. It's just that at times the levels exceed what we are able to cope with and overwhelm us. So some of the tips that you need to be cognizant of is, one, you need to be self-aware. What this means is you need to listen to yourself. What is my body telling me? Because it will communicate if there is pain, if there is discomfort, if there is tightness, it will communicate. But oftentimes we are so consumed by the noise of life we don't listen to our bodies. So what happens is we only pay attention when it is in an extreme situation. And one of the way we end up with burnout is because we haven't been listening to our bodies, for example. So be self-aware. What is going on in my thought space? Am I being able to start and complete thoughts, or are my thoughts disjoint, scattered all over the place, and I can't focus and complete and think through tasks or thoughts or things that I'm just processing in my mind? So what is going on in my thought sphere? What's going on in my physical body? Are you able to feel the different parts of your body and what they're trying to communicate to you? So a practical exercise that we normally do is just ask that you sit on a seat that has a straight back, and make sure that your feet are flat on the ground and pressed down so you can feel the ground. You can feel the lower thighs press against the base of your seat. You can feel your back all the way to the base of your back, push against the back of your seat. And if it has armrest, then you can feel your arms rest on the armrest, and you can feel that entire sensation. So what that does, it helps you get into the present. And if you're in a room and you're doing that kind of an exercise, then look around and pick an item or a spot or something that you are sure nobody has noticed or would easily notice. What that does, it brings you into the present situation, and it helps you start just getting a sense of what your body is saying to you and what the different parts of your body are saying to you. Normally, we couple that with a deep breathing exercise, and just helps you relieve some of the anxiety. Like I mentioned, these are just things I can mention in passing, but not get into a lot of detail about. Physical well-being, let me speak about a few things here. Number one, sleep cycle and your feeding patterns. Make sure that you are attending to this, that you are feeding well and that you are sleeping well. I know the times are hard, and it's possible that resources are limited, but with what you have, try and make sure that you are able to take care of yourself. Try and make sure that you get a good night's sleep. Now, if you're dealing with anxiety, then you need to address that aspect, especially if insomnia is a challenge you're dealing with, or lack of sleep, or troubled sleep, or disrupted sleep. And there are tips and techniques that can help with that, and we'll be glad to share those with you. But try and get your sleep rhythm in, and feed and nourish your body well. Exercise, stretch, breathing, I've talked about, and posture, how you hold your body. We are spending a lot of time indoors now, mostly slouched in sofas, and you may want to reconsider that. You may want to hold your body up in strong posture, in healthy posture, because this helps you with your overall wellness. Personal grooming, take care of yourself. Shower, comb your hair out, just take good care of yourself. Take care of your clothes, the outer garments and the inner garments. Get into fresh change, and just make sure that you are well groomed, that you are brushing your teeth, that you're just doing these basic things that take care of yourself. Don't let yourself just waste away. Even a beautiful garden, if left untended, will grow weeds and become unkept. Build routines. Routines and rhythms to life help us address this aspect of anxiety. So let your sleeping cycle be consistent. Have a predictable time when you go to sleep, a predictable time when you rise up, predictable time when you have your meals. Now we tend, because we are in home spaces, we tend to snack a lot. Work this out so that you have clear routines of when you engage with other people outside your space, routines of how you interact with those within your space, routines of when you work, if you are working from home, and most of us are working from home, routines of when you do chores and other things that need your attention in the home space. But build routines. Eliminate clutter if you can, or reduce it if you can. And the best way to remove clutter is not to move things around. because you just end up with the exact number of items, only just in a different place. What you want to do is remove everything from your room or the space that you want to declutter, and only bring back the items that have to absolutely be brought back into that space. Socially, have a support circle around yourself. Don't journey through the crisis alone. Get a friend, get a circle of friends, and let them be your support system as you journey through this time of crisis. This will help lower your anxiety levels. Avoid arguments and toxic environments if you can help it. Some of us are in marriage or relationship situations that are very toxic, and this confinement is not helping, it's compounding, and that needs to be addressed separately. But if you can, avoid argumentative environments and avoid toxic environments. Intellectually, keep sharp, keep your mind challenged. Be moderate in your consumption of news and information, because a lot of what is being channeled and we are being blasted with is leaving us drained and is only serving to heighten our anxiety levels. So if you can determine even when you are going to consume social media and give time to that, but don't be constantly hooked to your screen, consuming social media content, because this will probably just serve to heighten your anxiety levels. Emotional well-being, we have a lot of pent-up emotion that needs to find a healthy way of finding expression and finding an out, being vented out. So replenish your emotional energies. Don't let that well run low. Your spiritual well-being, oftentimes when you see this, we think about our relationship with the Supreme Being, relationship with God, but also this speaks to your sense of meaning. If you remember, earlier, it's one of the signs that we talked about. So your sense of meaning, your sense of purpose, your sense of fulfillment with your station in life, with your resources, and where you've reached, and what you do, and how you engage. So nourish this aspect of yourself. If it remains depleted, then probably anxiety will find fertile ground to thrive. So I've talked about a number of things. I don't know which one of these spoke to you specifically. And maybe in the chat, you can just mention an area that might have spoken to you, or that might have touched you, and you said, ouch, that relates to something I need to do something about. And if possible, just indicate which one are you going to start with? Which of these are you going to start doing something about immediately? And Faith, if any comments have come in, I'd be glad to just hear one or two, because I want to change gears now and shift into the financial tips. So maybe I can just pause and allow if there is any thought or comment that has come from the last input.
Okay, thank you, Henry, once again for that portion of the presentation. I want to think that I think we are seeing that we are houseful and very attentive. I think we are more of digesting what you are feeding to us. But for me, something stood out in avoiding argumentative people, and seeing that I'm very passionate about personalities, and I'm a choleric myself. I hope that's not what people are saying of me, that I'm the argumentative person that they need to stay away from. So that stood out for me, so that even as I avoid argumentative people, then I also need to watch that I'm not that person who's doing that. So some comments that I'm seeing have come in. Grace is saying emotional well-being and spiritual well-being, more so when she feels overwhelmed. I think those are the ones that have stood out for her. And then Judith Murungi is saying being self-aware. John Detta said, we actually have many who have been, oh, sorry, that's something else. That's about joining the group. Henry, let's just say you're doing a good job. People are knocking on the door, and unfortunately we are full to capacity at the moment. All right, so maybe you can just go on as people continue to give in their comments, and we'll catch up with them later.
All right, thank you, Faith. So as I mentioned, we are dealing with financial anxiety. We are dealing with two pillars, a psychological pillar and a financial literacy or competence aspect. So I'm not going to shift to the financial aspect, but to remind us also that we are having this conversation in the context of crisis. So we have crisis, and the current one we have is a COVID-19 crisis, and we are having to deal with financial anxiety in this context. So a crisis, by my assessment, has three stages to it. Pre-crisis, which means the period before the crisis comes, and in this period, the investment is in preparation. This is where we talk about preparing for a rainy day. So this happens pre-crisis. For example, if we are, and I'm not likening retirement to a crisis, but even when you are helping people prepare for retirement, we talk about the pre-retirement period, which is a 10-year period before you retire. And there is what you can do in that period. So pre-crisis is preparation. Now, the course we offer, I mentioned at the beginning, I mentioned again, Financial Freedom for Families is a course that speaks to how you prepare for financial crisis situations. But I will not focus on that right now because we're already in the crisis stage. So I'll spend my time in what I will describe as the mid-crisis stage. And here I'll speak of two things in the financial aspect. I've already spoken about self-care in the previous aspect. Hibernate and survive, and we learn from the example of the bear that is well adapted for this in nature, and learn and adapt. Then I will spend a few minutes around post-crisis, which is focusing on how you shall relaunch yourself beyond the crisis, because that period is coming. But let's look at the bear, and let's look at how the bear has adapted to deal with harsh winter conditions. The bear has to ride harsh winter conditions, and it makes some adjustments so that it's able to ride that period. Now, which adjustments are these? Number one, it actually drops its heart rate by between 75 to 80%. The equivalent of from 50 beats per minute to as low as 10 or even sometimes 8 beats per minute. Number two, it loses 25 to 40% of its body weight. But it's very selective about the weight it loses. It actually loses body fat, not muscle. Why is this important? Because it needs the muscle mass when it awakens from its slumber to hunt and to get back on its feet. So it retains muscle mass, but loses body fat to the tune of up to even 40%. It adjusts its body temperature downwards to be at par with its environment. And this adjustment is anywhere between 7 to 8 degrees adjustment in body temperature. It does not defecate and it does not urinate during hibernation. The protein in its waste, it actually recycles and utilizes it to nourish the body. Amazing. It can actually get pregnant during this period that it is hibernating. However, the female of this species is configured to assess its resources. And the assessment determines whether it is in a position to carry a pregnancy to term or not. If it is able to carry a pregnancy to term, it actually allows the impregnation to go on. If by its assessment it determines that it does not have sufficient resources to carry its pregnancy to term, it actually withdraws the embryo and does not allow the implantation to happen. Amazing. And it can do all of this for all of 7.5 months. So what can we learn from the bear as we go through our financial winter seasons? What adjustments can we make? How can we adjust so that we can hibernate and survive and ride out a financial crisis, especially one that may play out over a prolonged period of time? So there are a few tips that I'm going to share with us. Number one, establish your net worth. And this is arrived at by computing your total assets and deducting from that your total liabilities. Hopefully, you will end up in a net positive position. If this is the case, you end up in a net positive position, then the next question you want to ask is, how long can you retain this net positive position into a crisis scenario? But the first thing you do is compute your net worth. Operate a written budget. Operate a written budget. You cannot continue spending your resources without being very particular and very deliberate about that. Number three, record all expenses. Any and every single expense needs to be written down. So when you do the course and the training, we require that participants write out each and every expense. And even when you do money transfer transactions, even the fees that are attendant to that transaction, we require that you write and compute those and keep a track of those. But track every single expense. Like the bear that does not defecate or does not urinate, you also need to cut all waste. Only that which is necessary and essential can make the cut. No wants in this period, you only operate with needs. And even for the needs, you use basic forms of those needs. So for example, if you're buying a set of seats in a crisis situation, I would actually challenge you to consider buying a plastic set of seats as opposed to an extravagant set of sofas. So you want to go basic, you want to go necessary, and you want to go essential when it comes to matters waste, to what you are spending your money on during a crisis situation. Now this next one is an interesting one. Build an emergency fund. Now an emergency fund typically is the equivalent of 6 months living expenses. And we deal with this in greater depth as we do the course. But in the context of a crisis, what you want to understand is it may get far worse before it gets better. So what that means is the little you have has to go as far as possible. You have to figure out how to stretch it and stretch it to the limit. So build an emergency fund and an attitude of stretching yourself through the crisis. Suspend new projects. And let me qualify the projects we are talking about. We are talking about projects, big projects that will drain your resources. You want to be cash rich in the context of a crisis. So if possible, suspend new projects is what we recommend strongly. Consider what assets you can sell or barter. What will tend to happen in crisis situation is people will not be willing to part with cash, and I've already talked about it. So you may want to consider transactions in kind. What is it that you have that you can trade for that which you need? So this is something that we invite you to consider. Avoid new debt. And if you are already in debt, consider renegotiating the terms of your existing debt. Financial institutions are quite understanding in these circumstances. Please go and engage. The worst thing you can do is to avoid or hide from the individual who you owe. and we dive into the issue of debt and how you manage debt and how you diagnose how you ended up in that situation and how you can cushion yourself against debt in the course that I talked about. But for now, suffice it to say that you have an open door to go and renegotiate the terms of your debt. And the bankers who are here can speak to that. Exercise edifying or affirming generosity. Now, this is generosity that leaves the recipient of your generosity feeling dignified. Give, but let those who receive have dignity, even in benefiting from your generosity. What are ways you can do this? Number one, if they are able to offer work in exchange for pay, then enter that agreement and understanding with them. Give them an opportunity to work and reward them generously for their work. If they are selling a good or a service, pay generously for it. Why do I say this? Because somehow, and if you look at the course we offer, it's deeply rooted in biblical principles and foundations. The principle that we have come to understand and respect is that generosity begets blessings for us. And so we encourage that even in the most desperate of circumstances, no one is without something that they can share with somebody who is in a more desperate situation. So exercise edifying and affirming generosity. That extra coin or shilling or amount that you are going to pay that individual may be small in your end, but big in their context. Build additional income streams, an additional income stream or streams. Now, in fair weather, during the preparation phase, pre-crisis, we normally advise that you work towards 7 income streams. But in the context of a crisis, then this may be a challenge. So you may just push yourself to see what additional income streams can I build, but work towards building income streams. Now, remember we talked about fear earlier and the underlying issue being fear. This is one tip that helps you confront that fear. Sit down and in financial terms, describe what your worst case scenario can be. What is the worst that could happen in your financial situation? Process that and start thinking, what would you do if that eventuality were visited upon you? So a certain worst case scenario. If you can, transfer whatever risk you can. I mentioned social unrest at the beginning of this presentation. And I mentioned that crime may be a factor that you may witness in the context of social unrest. If you are concerned that theft may be visited on you, consider a domestic package, which is insurance that covers your domestic property or valuable items that you leave the house with. Transfer the risk to a third party if it is possible. In this context, death is a taboo topic, but when we do these presentations, we advise strongly that you write your will. In the unlikely event of your demise, leave order, not disorder. If you have a will, then update it if you haven't done so in the last 5 years. Make your will current. That is a tip that we give you. Now, I've talked about a number of tips, Faith. I don't know which the participants may pick and want to implement immediately, but just in the chat context, I will invite them to just consider mentioning which one are you going to apply immediately. But let me bring this to a close. The next tip we give is learn and adapt. Whichever your industry is, your sector, your vocation, your area of interest, study it during this crisis season and try and infer the trends that are emerging and what you can do to position yourself to your own advantage. What skills can you develop? What resources can you tap into online and otherwise? What opportunities are emerging? Seek this out and figure this out. For us who are counselors, Now we can't see our clients the way we ordinarily would. It's not business as usual. So how do we switch to this new environment? How do we go online? How do we offer presentations and interactions in forums like this? These are adaptations that we all have to make in the context of this crisis. The bear that I talked about actually loses all the skin on its paw, and it gets a fresh layer of skin that it will use post hibernation. So what are you doing? What is the new layer of skin that you are growing that will help you post hibernation? Post crisis, I want to again stick with the bear and say, if you meet a bear that is awoken from its hibernation, it is often in the early weeks in a state that is described as walking hibernation. If you meet it, it will appear drunk or like it is in a stupor, and it stays in this state for a number of weeks before it fully regains body strength and function. So even for us, beyond this crisis, we shall emerge. It shall take some time for us to find our footing, depending on how prepared we are, and then we shall be either positioned to thrive in the new environment or to be overwhelmed by it. So have a plan to relaunch yourself into the new normal context. What will your first week look like? What will your first month look like? What will your first 3 months look like post-COVID? What will your first 6 months look like? What will your first year look like? So think through that and process that. The opportunities that are emerging, I've already talked about the online space. So online enterprise will be a thriving space beyond COVID. And it opens you up to an international market, not just the local outlet or the local market near you. So how can you position yourself for the online space? The other reality that has dawned on us is that globalization pre-COVID had pushed manufacturing to certain centers in the globe. What COVID has done is shown all governments that you may have resources but not be able to access that which you need, because the country that is manufacturing or producing it is prioritizing its own survival and that of its citizens. So what governments are going to do post-COVID is they are going to be very warm and accommodating of local manufacturing at whatever level, whether it's at cottage industry level where you can start small, or it's at medium or even large scale. But local manufacturing is one of the spaces that is going to open up. So what can you start producing in big or small quantities that can help you position yourself at an advantage beyond COVID? Think through that and then figure that out. My question as I draw to my last comments is, what would you do different? What would you do different if you knew for a fact that the source of income that you have known and depended on pre-COVID will not be available to you post-COVID? What would you do different now if you knew that your source of income that you knew before COVID will not be available to you post-COVID? What would you do different? That's the question that I want to leave you pondering with as I bring my presentation to a close. So I've talked about our COVID context and referred to it as a crisis within which we are operating. I've talked about financial anxiety and that it has two pillars. It has a psychological pillar and it has a competence and a literacy pillar. I've spoken to tips that would help you ease anxiety levels if you have financial anxiety or indeed any other anxiety that you may be struggling with. And I've also spoken tips that would help you practically respond in terms of just improving your financial situation within the context of the COVID crisis that we are in and possibly beyond that context. What I would like to say is this: if you yourself or a loved one suspect, maybe from these presentations and research that you will do after this, that you are dealing with financial anxiety, or any anxiety for that matter, I want to finish with a plea to you. Please seek help. Please seek help. Anxiety is the beginning of a continuum that only gets more complex and more difficult to address and to resolve. So you are better off addressing it early and nipping it at the bud. So research, figure out, reach out for help. If it's financial literacy help that you need, please seek help from somebody who is able to help you build your financial muscle and your understanding of how money works, so that you're able to stretch the coin that you have and make it work better and longer for you. If it's psychological help that you need, reach out to a counselor. And this pool and this setting where we are having this presentation is hosted by a community of counselors. There is help at hand. You are able to get help if you need it. But seek help. Because if you don't seek help, then there's potential for harm, both for yourself and for others. There's potential for harm, both for yourself and for others. So Faith, with that passionate plea, I want to bring it to a close. And now I can respond to maybe some of the questions that have come up, and maybe some of the comments that that have been put forward. So I'll just give a minute to that before I do my final comments. Faith?
All right, Henry, you have lit the chats on fire. I think you've taken it home with these financial conversations. There's a lot of activity, but let me start with the part for anxiety. So someone else had asked. So I know one person, the one I read is oversleeping.
Yes.
Part of it. Then someone else asked, what about overeating, which is something I think a lot of us have found ourselves doing. So maybe you can reply to that as well. But as far as the points that some people picked on what to do to cater to take care of the anxiety, someone said trying to establish a routine, which has been a challenge without the structures that they're usually used to. That's one boy. Anne said she likes, the whole idea of building routines, especially around physical well-being, spiritual, and she's prioritizing the same. Joffrey said, be kind and forgiving to yourself. I think sometimes it's true, we forget to do that. All right, then a lot of people have appreciated the presentation. Grace is saying coping with anxiety was very well presented, and Helen Wagoi agrees with her. Then there's a question, Grace Minor, it's not clear which part you are asking, so maybe I'll give you just a comment, a minute later to unmute yourself and say, you asked how is this done? So I'm not so sure what you're referring to in that case. So now when we got to the financial part of it, Cheryl says, right now, when there's when you talk of needs during this period, for me, it has come down to bills, food, and shelter. Clothes don't even feature in that equation anymore. So I guess that's also in line with the bear story. We are shedding off the things that that are extra weight. Anne Munene says, amazing insights. Dr. Margaret Maura appreciates, says, wonderful presentation and quite unique. And I agree with her. I think this is a conversation that we've not had amongst us, at least not in this forum. Simple and clear, great job, Henry. That's from Evelyn. And this was interesting for me. I don't know if I'm reading your name well, Amike Omuba. He summarized what you said towards the end. He said he's hearing 3 A's, how to deal with the finances post-COVID. He says he's hearing accept, adapt, and adjust. So I thought that was very interesting.
Nice summary, very nice summary.
Cosmas also says, great insights. And he's asking, just to confirm, did you say that we need to have 7 income streams? And I think two people, I think I saw another person also asking the same. A lot of people, cutting on waste has resonated with them. Yes, let me see. Susan Gitao says what she's taking home is the need to note every coin that she spends and then to operate on necessities. Joseph is grateful for the presentation. All right, let me see. Okay, there are quite a number. Let me see if there's another question that we could respond. A lot of them really are just saying good work, Henry, and I agree with you. So there's a question. COVID comes with job loss for relatives, hence increasing relative support. How do you manage this without causing conflict? Someone going by Galaxy PK, and I think that's actually a very fundamental question. In our African society, we take care of our family members. So how does that augur when you're telling us to cut down on costs, but our family members are asking of us to support them? Yeah, maybe we can handle that. But before that, let me ask Grace to unmute herself and ask the question so that when you're answering, Henry, you can answer all of them at a go.
All right.
Grace? Grace, are you available? Okay, all right. Henry, maybe you can just tackle the questions that have been asked as we'll see if we'll give Grace an opportunity later. The floor is yours.
So I think the first two, the oversleeping and the overeating, I think this there seems to be a recurring thread there. So I will challenge Helen. Let's do a dedicated session around this and what they manifest and what they mean. So because this requires better expounding. So Helen, if you are able to, maybe this is something we can queue up as we look at just what these habits represent. But back to my earlier comments, and I was responding to oversleeping, you cannot take this in isolation. It's normally a combination that you look at, and then for how long this has been manifesting before you draw a conclusion and a correlation. So that would be my comment on that. On the 7 income streams, this is always a fascinating one. I was very careful to qualify and say that during the preparation phase, I mentioned we offer a course that helps one organize personal finances and plan around them. And for the COVID season, we are considering doing a fast track. We ran that course over 6 months because we want you to experience financial inflows and outflows. We want you to experience significant life events as you are applying the lessons that we are passing on to you. But since you're already in a crisis situation, what we are considering to do as the Financial Freedom for Families fraternity is to run a fast track version of the course that would help that would help individuals just cope. We hope to do this over the month of June and July. So if you're interested, my contacts are up there. You can just express your interest, and we'll see if we're able to pull it off on Zoom or online platforms. But that said, what that period, over that 6-month period we do is we encourage that you start thinking through your income streams and how you can grow them. So 7 income streams is a recommended range for your passive income vehicles. So yes, I said 7, and that is at a minimum. But when already we are in a crisis situation, then we are thinking, what is it I have in my hand that I can use or monetize? What service can I give? What skill set can I ride upon in the context of a crisis that can allow me to get that extra coin? So the way you attack your finances, financial challenges in the context of a crisis is you minimize your expenses and you look at where can I draw in an extra coin, and you want to think through that. But in a crisis, you're in a survival and hibernation mode. So we do understand that you may be very limited in the context of a crisis and may not be able to come up with a range of 7 income streams. But beyond the crisis, because this season shall pass, then I would want you to know that that is your working figure. You need income streams, at least for your household, at least 7 income streams for you to be able to weather financial upheaval. Because as the COVID situation is revealing to us, this is part of life. And so we shall experience them. Even after the COVID one, we shall ride it out, God willing. Beyond it, we shall still have other challenges financially to contend with. So you want to multiply your income streams as a household, and your working target is 7. So yes, you had right on that one. The other question that came up was on job loss. In this situation, yet you're still being looked at as your obligations haven't changed, and possibly relatives and people close to you that you cannot ignore, especially in an African context. We are very communal. You cannot ignore these individuals, yet you're already stretched and strained. That is where we are giving the recommendations that we are giving. You need to really, really tighten your belt and stretch the very little that you have. For us who are persons of faith, you know you can rely on God. We have example upon example upon example in the holy writings that point to God as a resource in the times of crisis. So you partner with God, you figure out how to multiply and to stretch your resources, and you just do one day at a time. But that is the reality that is with us. So the little that we have, let's see how far we can stretch it. And even with that little, we still are called upon to share. And that's where I was talking about the kind of generosity that affirms and gives dignity to those who we are sharing it with. So I hope those comments help. So Faith, I don't know whether there are any other comments that you'd want me to attend to. I'm cognizant of the time and would want anybody who is pressed to not have to stay on much longer.